Christians believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross and then he was resurrected 3 days after his death. He later rose up to heaven and was seated at the right hand of God. On the other hand, the vast majority of Muslims believe that Jesus Christ was not put on the cross at all. Another person that looked like Jesus was crucified by the Jews, while the real Jesus had been raised to heaven bodily by God. Both of these beliefs are contradictory, not only to logic, but also to understanding and indeed the laws of nature. They're also totally negated by historical evidence. Even a superficial look at the Bible reveals that although Jesus Christ was hung up on the cross, he did not die and was still alive when he was taken off the cross. This is the belief of a small community of Muslims called the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, whose founder was the first person to proclaim to the world that Jesus had survived the cross and escaped eastwards towards India. Now this aligns with what Jesus had proclaimed his mission to be in the Bible, to find the lost sheep of Israel. History dictates that a few of these lost tribes has settled in India and merged with the natives of Kashmir. Jesus, in stages, traveled to Kashmir and discovered these lost sheep of Israel among the people who were Buddhist in faith, and that these people had come to accept his message. Now there is a whole set of unbelievably interesting evidence that proves that Jesus went to India, of which I want to give you only a few. A man nailed on the cross does not die from his wounds. He dies surprisingly from suffocation. Hanging by just arms, one's chest is compressed. It becomes hard to breathe without supporting the body weight on the legs. Over time, the strain on the legs and the pain makes it impossible to breathe. Death from crucifixion takes much longer, often several days. The only way to hasten death on the cross was to break the legs, making it immediately difficult to support the body weight and therefore to breathe. The Gospels all agree that Jesus was taken off after 3 to 6 hours, and his legs were not broken. Another interesting fact that proves Jesus was still alive was that when Jesus' side was pierced, blood and water came gushing out. Truly a sign of a beating heart. Perhaps the soldiers did not break his legs because he was passed out in a coma. The Bible speaks of Joseph and Nicodemus, a great physician of his time, coming to visit Jesus in the tomb at night, bringing with them a mixture of myrrh and aloes, 100-pound weight. Myrrh is a very well-known medicinal herb used in ointments and for dressing of wounds in Greek medicine. It has been used for centuries. In books of herbal medicine, some of which are renowned books of Greek medicine, there is a mention of an ointment labeled Marham-e-Isa, ointment of Jesus, in which myrrh is the dominant ingredient. The books have recorded that this ointment was applied to the wounds of Jesus to heal him, not as an embalming formula. Now the sequence of events as recorded in the Gospels grant absolute proof that Jesus Christ was taken alive from the cross and was still alive when he was placed in the tomb. Because in accordance to these records, not only did he later disappear from the tomb, but he met some of his disciples. He showed them his wounds and asked for some food. He also disguised himself so that the Jews do not recognize him. Now, if Jesus considered himself the messenger to Israelites, as is verified by the Gospels and the Quran, then after deliverance from the cross, it is most fitting for him to have traveled to Afghanistan and Kashmir towards the lost sheep. It was not only an inference, but historical fact, proofs of which have been preserved in history at so many steps along the way. One should also keep in mind that Jesus was sentenced to death under Roman jurisdiction, and migrating eastwards away from Roman rule was the only safe way for him to travel. According to traditions dating back to the 1st century AD, and several ancient works in Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit cultures, Jesus survived crucifixion and migrated to live in Kashmir, arriving at about 78 AD. 10th century Persian documents indicate that the name Yus Asaf was given to Jesus out of respect in a city in Iran called Naispan. Yus Asaf means the healer, the shepherd, and the one who gathers people together. Jesus thereafter traveled to Pakistan, where his mother Mary was buried in a city called Muddy. Then Jesus traveled to India and finally to Kashmir. It is interesting to note that Jesus was put on the cross initially in a place called Golgotha, which translates to the city of skulls. And the place where he stayed in Kashmir is called Gilgit, or Srinagar, which also means city of skulls. The ancient Indian book Bhagavad Mahapurana, written in 2nd century AD, comprised of historical events. The book speaks of a meeting of Raja Shah Bahab around the 1st century with a man called Isa, who tells the king that he has come from the west. He was born a virgin and that his people had persecuted him, and that he is the Messiah. The first most authentic and complete work of history of this area, called the History of Kashmir, has stated that the grave in Srinagar, which is referred to as the grave of Yusuf Asaf, is the grave of that prophet to Israelites whose one name was Isa, or Jesus, and that he arrived there from the Holy Land. In Srinagar, there is a tomb called the Rosabal, where at the grave there is a plaque upon which the inscription reads, "This is the grave of Yusuf Asaf." It is known amongst the people that this grave of a prophet, this prophet was sent to Kashmir. Even today it holds the status of the grave of a prophet. The tomb has been proved to be in existence since the 2nd century AD. Now the tomb of Yusuf Asaf lies in the Jewish tradition of east to west, whereas Muslims are buried in north to south direction. Buddhists and Hindus, of course, are cremated. In this tomb there is another important relic, a stone upon which are carved footprints of Yusuf Asaf, discovered in 1975 by a prominent archaeologist and retired director of state archives for Kashmir, Dr. Fida Hasnain. There are clearly visible scars in the footprints which indicate that Yusuf Asaf was put on the cross. The position of the scars behind the toes do not match each other, but they align if a single nail was driven through both feet, if the left foot was placed on the right. Another interesting evidence is found at a nearby local temple of Solomon, where an inscription in one of the pillars directly states that Yusuf Asaf is Jesus, prophet of the children of Israel. The Persian inscriptions are from the year 78 AD, around the date he was said to have arrived in Kashmir. Now, one disturbing fact visible at the tomb is a series of changes and alterations. There are reports of relics and items related to tombs being sold off or held in people's houses, and the tomb suffering from serious decline at the hands of the current caretakers. What lies ahead for the tomb is hard to predict. Unlike at the time of its discovery, there is now a clear assertion of the locals and the caretakers that the tomb is not related to Jesus and that it must be locked up. Any publicity around the tomb is unwelcome. However, publications and documentaries are being produced about the tomb, linking it to Jesus Christ. This is garnering interest around the world, and more people are becoming aware of its existence every day. It appears that the tomb is being pulled in a very different directions by two equally determined groups of people. To compound the problem, the geographical location of the tomb is an area plagued by terrorism, hampering efforts for further research. Will the truth ever be known and accepted about this tomb? Any future efforts to prove who lies in the tomb will have to be made with sensitivity and will require much diplomacy.